talk about a space that was very, very hot through the course of the pandemic, the startup ecosystem. We saw valuations rocket. We saw unicorns being minted every other day. And while it's very clear directionally we are headed in the right direction, at this point in time, there is going to be some pain on account of liquidity drying up. What is your own take on what we're seeing happen in the startup space, the funding that is likely to come in, where it's going to go, what valuations are going to look like? What do you make of that story?
Well, I think startups are certainly a very, very important part of the future of this country. And it's across a range of what we do. And what excites me the most is you also have startups in areas like climate sustainability, where I think, frankly, if we marry the rest of industry, academia, and the startups together, we have a story that nobody else has, right? And we are not doing it as a small country. We are doing it as an extremely large country, and a country which has the history of being able to replicate good performance. If we do it, we'll do it well, and we saw it in digital payments, for example, and we saw the outcomes of it, like, say, financial inclusion. So I think there's still a big story there. You hinted a bit at governance also, for example.
Yes.
I do certainly think that, yes, in startups, governance is challenging. You also do have conflicts in terms of ownership and management and everything else. But it'll sort out over time. It's already starting to sort out in a big way. It's on the table. People are talking about it. And the good thing is, this country is when we talk about it, we generally fix it. We may not fix it publicly, but we do fix it. So I think that'll get fixed. Capital starvation, yes, I think for a period of time now, particularly in periods of material uncertainty like this, and the pressures that of what is happening in the United States, I do think, yes, capital is going to be a little more scarce. Valuations in any case, I think, were a little on the high side, and perhaps getting a little sobriety into it is good for all of us. So I think overall, I don't think it's gloom and doom out there. I think it just means you need a little more hard work. There's no easy money anymore.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it helps others as well, because sometimes when you get overfunded and you start, indiscriminately using the money, you also harm the ecosystem, because there's some other genuine players out there who get swamped out because there's one player who's able to flood the market at a lower cost, etc.
Yes. You talked about governance, and I want to address the issue of not just governance-related risks, but other risks that CEOs are mindful of today. Cybersecurity is a big challenge. With this whole move towards work from home, etc., there has been not just cyber threats, but other kinds of issues that companies have had to deal with, moonlighting being one of them, which now industry after industry is trying to understand what they should do, how they should deal with this. If this is the new reality, how do you ensure that you move forward? Do you shut the door on it completely? Do you leave a window open? What are some of these other risks and challenges that have emerged through the pandemic that CEOs and companies are having to deal with?
Well, as you described moonlighting is working at night. I think a lot of people have been sunbathing. They've been doing it in the daytime as well. They've been working at more than one company. I think it's an ethical piece of it. It's a confidentiality, data privacy, and everything else that kicks in. But it's also a new reality. We cannot expect that the workforce of the future is going to be, it's going to be more about jobs, it's going to be less about employment. And it's something we've got to deal with. Similarly, when you look at hybrid working, it's here to stay. I mean, we keep humoring ourselves by saying we look at it 2 years at a time. But I think some things, you get hardwired, it's become a habit. I mean, I think our brains are now thinking in terms of the fact that if I come to work 3 days a week, it's a good thing to do. So I think we have to get that piece of it sort of institutionalized. That will happen. Sorry, I missed the other piece of what you said.
No, I'm saying that the key risks, whether it's cyber
so if
or...
Yeah. Now, so therefore, one side of it is that it's basically working from home and the nature of how you deliver that work. We stress more in terms of how you work, the workforce. We are talking less about the workplace. I genuinely think that one of the greatest advantages we've had during the pandemic is automating a lot of processes, looking at processes new and saying, okay, this is the way we used to do it when we had 5 people doing it, but can I do it differently? The second thing is disaggregating it and saying, can I do some of this which is repetitive centrally? Do I really need to do this coming to an office, or is it something that I can do remotely? not even sitting in a tier 1 city, but sitting in tier 2 or tier 3. So all that stuff is also happening at a very good pace. Second piece you talked about was cyber. Cyber, I think, is the risk. One, because digitization is pervasive. It's very deeply embedded in our financial services. If you look at the use of technology, it's there in our tax systems, it's there in our emails, in our correspondence and everything else. The bigger worry there is, today the nuclear button is really a cyber button. So when you look at cyber security, it's not just the non-state actors that we've got to look at, we've got to look at the state actors. And we do have a lot of valuable national institutions here. And one can expect that at some point in time when things overflow from a Ukraine crisis or elsewhere, that the cyber button will be pressed. So we should always be cautious in terms of cyber security. It's going to be there to stay with us and haunt us. This again is a bigger challenge for mid-sized business, because for them to articulate what they need to do and invest in what has to be done is harder. And we've got to find platforms on which they can engage on which they can also be supported.
Let's talk about the business here in India for Deloitte, and it's been growing substantially. What's the plan like as we close out 2022 in terms of hiring, in terms of growth?
Well, happy to say that if I look at the overall footprint of Deloitte in India, as of this week, we've crossed 100,000 people in India. That's true to what my global CEO Puneet was always expressing, that he had committed 125,000 people in India. We're nearing that goal. I don't see a slowdown or let up in getting to that goal, and we will be there very soon. Within the Indian practice itself, in terms of all the organizations in India, I think that growth has been consistently good. And if I look at the next 4 years, it's extremely positive. We are looking more in terms of getting out of only the major cities into the towns as well, because we discovered during the pandemic that 60% of our workforce actually was outside of the big cities. And so now we are going more and more into the other states as well. The other exciting thing that's happening in India is, I think the states are getting energized. And we're generally finding the competitive spirit in states is also increasing. So we do see that eventually the India of the future will also have a lot of industry, manufacturing, etc., not just concentrated, but dispersed across. And I think that's the way to go. So we are planning for that India as well.
Well, one of the other aspects that I know the Big Four, including Deloitte, have been working on is, of course, the ESG framework, which was put together with the World Economic Forum. What's the India experience been like in terms of measuring the impact of what companies are hoping to do on the ESG front?
The trouble in India is when we start something new, we talk a lot about it, but the deliverables are always a little opaque. My personal view is that sustainability is ingrained in every piece of advice that we give our clients, every piece of it. Because if you look at an attest piece, there is an attestation that needs to be done. If there's a financial reporting piece, again, India is trying to be ahead of it in terms of what we have to do. When you look in terms of manufacturing, if you look at supply chains, it's there, it's everywhere. So we are trying to say, how do you make it ubiquitous and say that your mindset when you think is think sustainable. Now, can you sell it as a separate product or service? I think initially you've got to package it in a way by which you can make people understand the importance of it all. But eventually it has to just get weaved into the overall fabric of what you do. In terms of size of what will the opportunity, it's huge. But the cost of not doing it is 3 times as big. So I think the loss to the economy if we don't build a sustainable environment is very much more. And that is really what we are looking at. I mentioned the G20 earlier. I think that's a huge opportunity for India to, as you know, we have taken our climate pledges and we are advancing what we are doing. And I think that that's an important thing that we've got to put out ahead to say that this is something that we have to build on. We can also look at food security and say, what are we doing around food? We can look at energy security. See, all these things are interlinked. It's not just sustainability. It's sustainability and survival that we have to look at together.
Let me end then by asking you about some of the big global changes that are on the anvil. The OECD very recently put out just the broad framework of what they hope the world will move to in terms of regulating crypto assets. There is, of course, the BEPS norms that have already been articulated as well, but we have to see how those play out. In terms of global changes, what are you going to be watching out for and the implications of them?
Well, BEPS is important, and it's important to our clients as well. I think that the most important thing that I'm looking at is the transformation that cloud is going to bring to us. Because I really think that people underestimated the power of putting things on the cloud. And that transformation, the cloud and digitization are really going to transform the world in which we live. And therefore, when I then look ahead and when people talk about, the other things, the meta and everything else, to say what's going to happen, I've sort of started believing that all of this is really going to happen. So I think being able to look beyond the curve, imagine what the future could be like, and then say, how can you participate as part of that future, also requires a mindset that when you invest, you should also be willing to abandon what you do to adopt something new. I think the worst thing that any company can do today is to get so committed down a path that they can't make the change which necessarily is going to happen. So there is going to be change as a constant. It's going to be a huge amount of change. A lot of it is going to be technology-led. It's going to lead to vulnerabilities like cyber and everything else that we talked about. There's going to be an insularity. Countries are going to be looking more in terms of protecting themselves. We've got to look at those supply chains. So it's going to be a very anxious world. And, that's the point of time in which, doctors come in handy.
And women too, and that's what I want to end by talking to you about. And I know that the global CEO Puneet Ranjan has been committed to championing the cause of bringing more women into the workforce, and of course that's been his mandate for Deloitte as well. I want to talk to you about the experience here in India.
Well, we have a fantastic experience. I mean, we have about 46% women in the workforce. Perhaps, we started this only about 7 or 8 years ago, so in leadership positions, we are down to about 17-18% with a target of getting to 25. And I'm being honest about it because it's an area in which I thought I would be able to accelerate faster but could not. But the more important thing is, if you look at women in the workforce, I think that again should be on the India agenda, which I think it is. And therefore, when you look at certain parts of business, when you look at manufacturing, when you look at offshoring, we just look and say, which parts of this can actually be done by, say, a woman-only workforce as well. So I think getting more women into the workforce is important. Unfortunately, the pandemic has been a bit of a setback. I mean, I want to end on a high, but the reality is that the pandemic was a setback and you had women leaving the workforce. We are working on it. We are testing it out to say, how can we advise companies to get them back in a different format? Hybrid is certainly one of those areas in which you do it. But I certainly do think the big driver for the growth of India to 5 trillion, I wouldn't put a number on it. I have it somewhere in my head, but I can't remember it offhand. But you will not reach the 5 trillion.
No, if you don't have the women
40-45% of your women in the workforce.
Absolutely. Well, and we hope that we move at least somewhat closer to that target. I mean, it's going to take a long time, but at least we shouldn't be going in the other direction, which is seeing a decline in the number of women actively participating in
7
the
years.
workforce.
I give it 7 years. In 7 years, we will be there.
In 7 years, we will be there. Well, we hope that is not just an aspirational target, but a target that we do achieve, and more power to everyone who's going to stay committed to that cause. Always a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us here, and again, I wish you a very, very happy Diwali.
Thank you, Shireen.
Well, that's it then on this edition of On the Record from all of us here on the show. Many thanks for watching. We'll see you shortly. Stay tuned.